SBC denominational leaders, influencers, and today I'm delighted to have Dr. Kevin Ezell, who is the president of the North American Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. Kevin, can you hear me?
I can. I can. Thanks
Great.
for your time.
Great. Thanks so much. So I just really jump into these things. We've been doing several of these. I think I don't even know how many so far. Started them before the convention in Anaheim and have been continuing them occasionally. But you and I talked back shortly after the convention, and given all the many moving parts, I just said, Dr. Ezell, if you are willing to give an hour of your time, I'd like to invite you to one of these, and it's kind of wherever you want the conversation to go, but it's an open, candid, unscripted, unplanned, unrehearsed conversation about the things that are um, affecting how Southern Baptists are contemplating the contemporary situation where we find ourselves, both the tremendous successes in terms of forward mission expansion and some of the concerns as it relates to the abuse crisis that is in our midst, etc. So it's free range conversation, and I'm delighted that you are willing to be transparent and engage and lean in this way. So thanks so much. In preparation for this conversation, I always like to go back in the Southern Baptist Historical Library and Archives and just see what I can find about the first mention of the person I'm going to be talking to, the first mention of their name in the archives in any of the Baptist Press archives or various personal papers that I've actually dug through. Um, so I found the first thing I ever found in the Southern Baptist Historical Library and Archives was a letter from you to Dr. Morris Chapman, all the way back in 1990, and it was right after he'd been elected in New Orleans. And I couldn't figure out what on earth it meant because, and I sent it to you a couple of years ago, if you remember. But it said, something along the lines of, Dr. Chapman. I find it one of the greatest honors and privileges that people often mistake me for you. What was that
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. Well, back right when he was elected, people would come up and say that we looked alike, and so that was it became a joke with the two of us, but it was from a distance, and uh, it's just one of those things that people thought I looked like Michael J. Fox, but then I had several say Morris Chapman, so got a kick out of it, and so it's
Right.
just a way to connect. I mean, I always appreciated. Um, when he was running for president and leading the convention, I always appreciated him, and it was an easy connector.
Well, when did you sort of first um, sort of get when did you first know about something called the conservative resurgence? What what was your first introduction to what was happening in the convention?
Yeah, it was this, Southwestern seminary, and that's when I first became again acquainted of what conservatives were, liberal was. I was my parents. They were saved in a Southern Baptist church. We were Southern Baptists. We moved to Paducah, Kentucky, and their number one concern was to find a church that had a soul winning program. And so we were always very conservative. They ended up joining an independent Baptist church that became a Southern Baptist church, just because they were the only ones that had a soul winning program. And
Right.
so that was always, I just grew up like that. We went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then we drove by there on Monday or Tuesday just to see if somebody was there. Uh, and 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 so we were always very conservative, and that's my first memory was back in those Charles Stanley days. The meeting in Dallas. I never went. My very first one I went to, was I think it was in San Antonio, and
The '88 convention, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And then you were pastoring in Marion, Illinois, at the time, if I remember correctly, or were you in Alabama?
No, no. I pastored in Tennessee. My very first church was in Fort Worth, Texas, when I was in seminary. They voted me in 7-0. My only unanimous call. It's on the north side of Fort Worth. Then I went to Tennessee for 2 years in Hartsville, Tennessee, right above Lebanon, where Cracker Barrel was birthed. And then uh,
Right.
and then I went to Marion, Illinois, for 5 years, and then went to Highview in Louisville for 14 years. And then I've been at NAMB now for in a week it'll be 12 years.
Well, when I was digging through those archives, I did find some references to you serving in Marion, Illinois. Interestingly enough, you have the distinction of having been called out of order at the Illinois Baptist Convention in 1995. Do you remember that?
Man, I do not know. Is that by the convention or my wife? Who straightened me out?
No, it was actually the presiding officer and the parliamentarian. So you brought a motion at the Illinois Baptist Convention in 1995, and your motion was to require that those persons being nominated for office at the Illinois Baptist Convention, that the nominating speech. Now, do you remember what your motion was?
I still don't. No,
You
that's
said
interesting.
your motion was to require that the cooperative program giving percentage of the nominee be included in the nominating speech.
Yeah,
And then they called it out of. They said it was out of order. And so the next day at the session, you rescinded your motion. So that technically, I guess you weren't out of order because you rescinded the motion. But it was funny. It was funny for me to find that there you
yeah.
were in '95 wanting CP to be something that was ever before Southern Baptists as they choose their leaders. Do you still think that that's important?
I do. I do. I think that and their overall missions giving is very, very important. And because sometimes, especially in how loud some of these people are and the negative people are, when we go back and look, they give very little. I mean, you got right here in my own state. I mean, you had a guy make a motion to do investigative of how this money's being spent in Georgia, and he gave nothing to CP, and it matters. Every church matters, but it's alarming. We're so grateful for how people give to Danny Armstrong, and this year again looks like it's going to be a record year. And Paul Chitwood and I were just talking this past week because Lottie's going to be an all-time record, and he's going to be looks like an all-time record. And 700 churches give 1/3 of the Annie offering out of
Wow.
47,000. There 9,000 churches give 90% of both of our offerings. 9,000 out of 47,000. And so, I think it does matter, and especially if the narrative in the SBC should be driven by what really brings us together, and it's missions. And so often we let people capture the narrative about things that really, to me, are not that significant, and rise above the idea of sending and reaching the world for Christ, which is why we come together.
Well, I said subsequent to your election at the North American Mission Board, and one of the top questions you were asked is, "What's your top priority?" And you said, we've got to get back to evangelism. We've got to get back to soul winning, one-on-one personal evangelism. It's absolutely critical. And I've got to tell you, I think this "Who's Your One" campaign has been one of the most remarkable emphases that's come out of the North American Mission Board in a long time. So,
Well,
how did that get birthed? Where did that come from?
several different ways. JD Greer, had a focus on who's your one. There's several different guys have different campaigns, and we have a lot of people say, hey, I did that sermon back in 1996. That's where you got that from. So I'm not saying it was an original thought, but the first one brought to my attention was JD, and just trying to bring people down to just who is your absolute one. And what's really uh, people don't realize is in the SBC, 60% of our churches baptize one or zero. And so we're just trying to get people, look, if even the pastor would baptize one in every SBC church, how significant our baptisms would increase. And we've just got to think about the basics. And man, I was so thrilled. Last week I got to have lunch with my one. I've been praying for it. I've got several ones now, but my original one, and he'd moved off, and he called and wanted to have lunch. And man, it was just so incredible because when you're praying for someone like that regularly, it's nothing better for any Southern Baptist to do to have a one and to continue to pray for that one. So you're gracious to say that, but really JD is the one that came up with the idea.
He was the one.
He's
Uh,
the one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
JD Greer has actually been my one this in these past several years. I'm praying for him and hope that he finds Jesus.
That's right. It
So
would help
just
us
you
all.
just
Yeah.
just join me in prayer for that. We'll hope that the Lord will give the increase. So I want
Okay.
to go back to sort of the process. 14 years at Highview, and you went to NAMB, and anybody that's been paying attention to Southern Baptist life for the last 40 years knows that the Home Mission Board and what became the North American Mission Board has been the epicenter and focus of a lot of criticism and controversy through the years. There was a rapid sort of turnover in leadership the 5 years preceding your arrival. There were questions that were raised about spending by one of your predecessors. Actually, all of your predecessors have faced these questions about how does NAM or the Home Mission Board spend money. Um, there was a whole report that came out of the trustees about inappropriate spending. They laid it out. Private jets being taken to European, countries, and I
No,
remember when all that was going on. So when you stepped into that role, there was already this sort of backdrop of low expectations. What made you decide to go to NAM? How did you sense that this was the call of God on your life for the next chapter of ministry?
all right, great question, and you're right. Just to make clear, all that happened prior to me, and we sold that jet to IMB. I just want to make sure that you know
Yeah,
that. No, I
Paul
was.
Chitwood's flying around all over, and they call it Air Lottie. I understand.
No, honestly, I didn't. The last thing I thought I'd ever do would be in a denominational position. Uh, I, I, I wanted to be a pastor. Wanted to retire a pastor. My dad was so proud of me being a pastor, and I'll never forget when I called him and told him they just elected me to be president of the North American Mission Board, and he said, "Well, that's good. Are you going to sell your mower?" I mean, that was exactly the conversation. I mean, he was not that thrilled. I wanted to go there because I felt like it could be effective, but that it wasn't. As a pastor, the NAM or sorry, Home Mission Board, however you want to say it, was not helpful to churches, and in my opinion, and they weren't focused. I felt like they were doing a lot of, trying to do a lot of things, but not doing any one thing really well. They had the potential to do well, but and I felt like they were a bit overstaffed. I thought you could do what you need to do with much fewer in the administrative office and more on the field. And when I got there, my suspicions were correct. When I got there, I mean, they weren't even tracking churches. That's why I go over and over and over. People talk about church planting records before 2010. My very first day at NAM, I asked them for the church plant names and addresses. They didn't have them, and they didn't track them. So, I mean, uh, it was as bad. It was really worse than what I anticipated, just because of the lack of focus and lack of detail and accountability. And so I'm so gracious. I'm so thankful for trustees who had a backbone when I got there. I told them, look, we can straighten this out. We can have a sense of a direction, and we can turn this around. But you have to have my back because it's going to get ugly before it gets better. And I'll tell you, people want to, knock on trustees. The trustee system at NAM works. I mean, the last two presidents of NAM are not there because the trustee system works. And they had my back. We were able to turn it around, and we're incredibly grateful for where we are and where we're headed.
Well, you said it was.
No, man, we were by far. My word, we were hoping that Annie would, stay at 50 million. If you want to judge, that's one area. This past year it was at 66.5, and this year it's going to be probably 67 or 68. So that's one indicator. And then the amount of churches, and then when we started off, we had challenges with state relationships. Now we have 41 out of 42 states we have very good relationships with, and so absolutely, it's significantly better. And we have a sense of focus. You ask people, what does the North American Mission Board what they do, and we survey it to make sure that they have a sense of, they know we plant churches, whether they like that strategy or not. They know we plant churches, and that's why we started Sin Network, and we do compassion mercy ministry with Sin Relief, and now in partner with IMB, that's worldwide and getting an incredible amount of traction. We do evangelism as far as helping churches focus on evangelism, but it's the churches that baptize people, not NAM. But so evangelism, where everything we do is about evangelism, Sin Network and Sin Relief, and then we're so thankful for the over 3,700 chaplains that NAM endorses and supports throughout the world, literally. And so we feel like it's not. I've been in NAM almost 12 years, and to me, it's the best it's ever been as far in my time there. I've never been more excited about where we are in the next 10 years. We're really excited because we have to spend less time on the pushback and more focused on the strategy.
I obviously, you know that I've been working on a book for some time, and one of the areas of the research that I've done is looking at the assessments of Southern Baptist evangelism strategy and how the criticisms of Southern Baptist evangelism strategy have been sort of uh, the graphs and charts and data and figures that have been used, and I've leaned quite heavily on some of the work that's been done by Dr. Chuck Kelly, trying to understand what he's been saying about the breakdown of evangelism and the loss of evangelism in the SBC. Have you reviewed some of the research that he's done, and where is his assessment right, and where is he not uh, having the full picture?
I've not read a great deal of his stuff, and
Well, he probably hasn't read a great deal of yours either. So,
I know yeah yeah. Chuck and I disagree on quite a bit, and um, I wouldn't agree with his premise. I mean, when I asked him once at lunch, what do you tell me what you think? What would you do if you were president of North American Mission Board? I mean, what do you want to do to stir evangelism? You tell me. If you want me to drop chick tracks out of a blimp, I'll do it. You tell me what you think I should. And to have, to have to have more of an emphasis on 2 week revivals and or a second week of VBS. And I mean, you know, those are just not cutting edge creative ideas. I'm all for trying anything. We're not trying to suppress baptisms or get churches not to do it. We are trying to get them to do it. And it sometimes people want to equate the amount of people you have in a department as emphasis on evangelism. That's what I underestimated. When I came to NAM, they had, my word, you would not believe some of the staff that we had that were doing absolutely, ineffective things. And so we tried to use practitioners and had less people on our staff here, and people would try to read into that, hey, we're not emphasizing it as much, which is not the truth. We're spending more on evangelism, and people get upset. They want to have somebody to kick, and NAM typically is it. And I
well,
appreciate.
either that or ERLC.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody misses Russ more than me, trust me. But but the the thing is, Chuck. Yeah, I'd rather not get. I just probably better. My dad always said, if you can't say something good, don't say anything at all. Probably
Well, no,
better
no.
just skip
I'm
on
not
that.
trying to. I'm not trying to make. There's no personal issue there. It's just the the facts are the facts, right? I mean, if you track
Yeah,
the evangelism numbers, baptism numbers, they're down. The
right,
conservative resurgence was sort of premised on, if we get this right,
right,
if we can get our doctrinal line correctly, that baptisms and evangelism and global missionary expansion are going to take off. But that hasn't happened,
right.
and there's been a downward trend over the years. And I'm just curious, where do you why is that? What has been the reason for that? And is the turnaround the strategic refocusing of emphases at NAM?
So I think where I would not agree with the premise that he would say, "Hey, look, all this emphasis on church planning has not helped." My point would be, look, if it wasn't for the church plant baptisms, you want to talk about a negative downturn. I mean, we're what's keeping them to where they are. 21% of all Southern Baptist baptisms outside of the South came from churches planted since 2010. And right at 10% of all Southern Baptist baptisms today are from churches baptized. It started since 2010. And you look at states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, 52% of their baptisms. In New England, 36% of the baptisms all come from churches that were planted since 2010. So to say, yeah, they're down, they are. To say, look, is it that because the emphasis of church planning is wrong? No. if it weren't for that, we would be worse than what it is. And I got, I said 60, when you have 60% of our churches baptize no one or one, I think the zero number is like 47%. When you have almost half the church baptized absolutely nobody. It's astounding to me how in Southern Baptist life, my preference would, if I had my way, you wouldn't be a Southern Baptist church if you went 2 years and baptized nobody and gave not 1 cent to missions. I think that's the part of the problem is we use these stats and we add them all up. We have a lot of people that are wearing the uniform that aren't really performing or even being a Southern Baptist church. If they don't give 1 dime, 1 cent to missions or baptize anybody, they've really missed the purpose of being, a part of this fellowship.
Yeah, it's an Elks Lodge.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the come with respect to church planting, and that is that NAMB has sponsored or supported some church plants where the leadership structure of those churches doesn't reflect Baptist faith and usage parameters on who may serve in pastoral roles. As you know, in Anaheim, a huge issue that came up before the convention, specifically as it dealt with Saddleback, and Rick Warren took the microphone. Well, he was offered a microphone, spoke to that issue. But NAM's gotten quite a bit of criticism from folks who go and I guess search the internet, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that. I know how to dumpster dive, but who search the internet, find that there's a church somewhere that has received NAM money, that has a NAM or a Sin Network logo on their website, and has a female listed as co-pastor or in some sort of pastoral role. Would you help me and help those that are listening understand uh, sort of the severity of the problem and is it a problem? And what have you led NAM to do to sort of tighten up on that area?
No, I'm so glad you asked the question. Well, one, you understand we live in a day where there's some narcissistic bullies out there uh, that want to try to create a false premise that this is like rampant out there. There's some that NAM does this, and which is it's nothing but a lie. I mean, these guys just lie. And what's really frustrating is even I call them on it. If I confront them and say, "Look, that is not true. You're saying things that are not true," and then they go right back out and do it again. Give you an example. One particular guy who's very loud about it. I said, "Look, you give me the name of somebody that you think is a female, but we do not have female planters. I mean, we have an assessment. Only males go through the assessment. I mean, we just do not have those." And then they talk about staff members. Well, 99% of our church plants when they start don't have staff. They are it, and they go out and find. Well, this one guy he gave me five, three of which were not Southern Baptist, and two we simply called and it was like a children's pastor and said, "Hey, look, you're getting sloppy with your language here. Could you change that?" And they did. And so all we ask, I've always asked those guys that want to focus on that type of thing is, "Hey, look, give me 24 hours to talk to them and correct their sloppy language." But what you have to understand, you're trying to create some false premise out there. Is we have assisted SBC in planting over 10,000 churches since 2010, over 10,000, and you give me five. I mean, it's like Allen Iverson saying, practice. You talking to me about practice? I mean, five churches, and you want to make Southern Baptists think this is some kind of big problem. And so it's not. At NAM, it absolutely is not an issue, a problem at all. The problem is these guys who want to, try to find some one-off out here where someone got sloppy with language, and then we just say, "Hey, give us 24 hours to call and talk to them." What happened is there was one guy, he jumped on this church's Facebook and just pulverized the church. And they're like, "Man, what is happening?" And they ended up, it was in Florida, and thank goodness, for Tommy Green, his fantastic leader there, called and walked them through it. But it's traumatizing, when they just get bombed. It's just so unchristian the way that some of these guys treat. And they want to make this issue equal to things like, things like affirming homosexuality or harboring some type of sex predator, and then okay, yeah, you have somebody called. I mean, it's ridiculous, and we do not want to end up having the credentials committee calling people based on a children's pastor somewhere. I mean, we just as the SBC, we come together missions focused. That does not disqualify us from joining arm in arm to send missionaries all over the world. And I'm just afraid sometimes we get our eye off the ball on things that are, look, it's, do some have sloppy language? Yes. Do we need to talk to them? Yes. Do we need to kick them out? And no, we just need to talk to them. And it's just not the problem that some of these guys want to make it. And I think some are just looking for clickbait.
As I was preparing for this, I went back and reviewed some of the material that's been, the research that's been done by my former professor of Baptist history, Dr. Keith Harper, who is a senior professor at Southeastern Seminary now. And I think it was the University of Kentucky, actually, is where he did his PhD work. He's written two great books. One of them is The Letters of Lottie Moon, and the other is The Letters of Annie Armstrong. And I actually called Dr. Harper the other day just to pick his brain about some issues related to Annie Armstrong, things I didn't even realize. I didn't realize how tremendously controversial she was in her day, um, and that there was a great amount of concern going back into the 1890s about that there was a very strong unmarried woman who at that point was responsible for as much as a third to 40% of the domestic or North American mission budget, in terms of the revenue that's being generated. I found out that basically WMU is what kept the Sunday School Board under J.M. Frost profitable for a season, because if the Sunday School Board hadn't been getting the business from WMU for producing mission literature, they wouldn't have been able to produce enough literature that was profitable. There was a time when Annie Armstrong, this very strong, mission-minded woman, was an ongoing conflict, even with heads of the North American Mission Board. I.T. Titchener and she locked horns, and it was back to this issue of what can women do. And in our conversation with Dr. Harper, he raised an interesting point, and I've been thinking about it since this. He says, when as long as we had women who were being appointed and they had a church planter, it began to be it got to be a little muddled. How's a church planter different from a missionary? And I don't have an answer to that, but I'm curious. What do you think about that? Is a church planter different from a missionary? Why not have can you have a female as a missionary but not a church planter? Help me understand what the North American Mission Board, how you're threading that needle.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, you got to be careful there because I mean, how we define it in North America, as far as all over uh, the world, might be different. For us, our church planters are missionaries, and they go into very hard areas, and they have to think missional. They have to work. They're working with lost people, trying to reach lost people. We're not looking for transfer growth here. But our missionaries, and again, sometimes in the terminology, when we send a couple, they'll say, yeah, we're church planters, but that's very clear who is the planter, who's the pastor. That's never up for debate. We have no church plants out there with co-pastors, anything like that at all. But we do consider our church planters missionaries because they absolutely are. And you have to think very strategically as a missionary if you're going to plant a church where we're doing it. And that's what I'm so proud of. I wish what dominated the narrative out there is some of the courageous, high capacity planters that we have. I mean, it's just what you'd be outstanding to see some of these guys. A guy in Maine like Dan Coleman. I could go from California to New Mexico to Florida, all over North America. Southern Baptists would be extremely proud with their church planting missionaries. And so, yes, we do call them missionaries. And is the wife a part of that? They are, but we don't count both. We count them more as a unit. And that's one thing. When I went to NAMB, I realized when they give their missionary count, they were counting by twos. And we now count by a unit, when we plant a church with a missionary, it's one instead of two. But we recognize they're both a part of the team. But to give an accurate account to Southern Baptists, we count them as units.
Well, I'm just gonna go ahead and lean in on this question, and I know some of the answer to it, so
Sure.
it's not entirely. This is not a loaded question, but I'm not shooting in the dark here. Some of the criticisms that's come for the North American Mission Board has been the way that NAM has purchased homes
Yeah.
in some forward advanced areas, some very expensive urban areas where real estate's very high, but NAM has purchased homes for pastors who were North American, somehow affiliated with the North American Mission Board or the Sin Network, and the exorbitant cost of those homes
Yeah.
has raised some eyeballs among people who are scrutinizing how NAM spends money. I know of one case in particular. There was a church planter that left a traditional Southern Baptist church in Tennessee, went and planted a church just outside of Denver. There was a home that was purchased,
Right.
and then in the process of that, the church planter was entitled to purchase from NAM the home that NAM had purchased, and then turned around within a matter of months and sold it for an incredible personal profit. Is that going on? Is that a common thing? Help me understand what NAM's doing in terms of buying real estate for homes
Yeah.
for churches uh, that then no longer become the asset of the North American Mission Board, but become an opportunity for personal enrichment of those. Is that a real criticism?
No, no, but it's a real question. I don't even look at it as a criticism. Heavens, we do it very strategically. So I appreciate you asking the question. We had about 100 of those homes. Our trustees looked at the benefit of those, and so we now are approaching roughly 200. The reason for that is very strategic. The majority of Americans live in major cities. 85% of North America live in and around major cities. Our weakest point were the major cities, and why? Because nobody could live there. And when we did a survey of the church plants that failed with their spouses, the biggest number one question was housing, and they just could not afford. I mean, you go to New York right now, and you know the exorbitant prices of apartments that are less than 800 square feet, and so what we want to do is to provide a house for a missionary couple to move in for 2 years at no cost other than utilities. And then after that 2 year period, they rotate out and we move another couple in. We save our missionaries about $4 million a year on rent. And we also did the calculations that we would save the money instead of just paying the rent. It'd be more profitable to us to purchase the home and then over time, obviously, we would come out way ahead. Now, there have been at least less than five, and the one you're talking about, obviously, is a pretty well-known one, where the planner came back and said, "Hey, look, can we purchase the home?" And so in those cases, we did allow them to do that, and we allowed them to buy it for what we paid for it. We did not take a loss, and then they ultimately, when they sold, they would make a gain. And now we thought giving it to them for what we bought it for showed that we weren't trying to take advantage of missionaries. We weren't in for it for profit. We just want to plant a church. And today there is a church there in Denver that runs well over 1,000. That's one of the top CP giving, one of the top 10 CP giving churches in Colorado. And we look at that as a success. Now, did that personal planner want, as I said, there have been less than five that wanted to buy it because they typically don't have the down payment, to be able to pull something like that off.
Well, that's because you're not paying them enough.
Of course they would. And the whole idea would be that they would make enough to provide a down payment for the home they were going to buy. We did one in California, one in Colorado. I think there's actually three. I'm saying less than five that they wanted to purchase, but typically they just can't. And we're not buying them for that purpose. We're buying for a strategic purpose of rotating guys in for the first 2 years, letting them save a down payment, and then letting them buy a home. And so, yeah, we're up to, and the trustees were so convinced that it was a good strategy. We doubled down and bought another 100. So we have 200. And now when, we go to sell one, we just sold one in California the other day. And because of the market, you end up you make $400,000. Well, we put that money right back in to purchasing some more, and they're really for residencies where we put those around the very best planners we have. So they come in there, they live, and they study under the best planners we have for 2 years, and then they launch the church. And what we found is, that's why our survivability rate is now well over 80% when it was below 50%. That's a 4-year survivability rate, not 1 year. These 1-year survivability rates are ridiculous. You can keep anything resuscitated for a year, but 4 years to have it over, between 80 and 90%, it's incredible. We think it's because we're in a sense measuring twice and cutting once and taking care of these missionaries. You know what I'm so thankful for is we've had pastors call when they've moved in their daughter and their son-in-law, church planner, say, I just moved them into this facility, and I just want you to know I'm thankful we take care of Southern Baptist missionaries this way. And I'm like, I am too. Then you have a church like Green Acres in Tyler, Texas. It's so gracious. They call and said, we believe in what you're doing. They gave us a considerable amount of money to purchase 3 different homes in Seattle and Portland and other places. And so, people sometimes are assuming we're using our funds to do that. We're not. We have donors and we have churches that believe in it that give us hundreds of thousands of dollars and sometimes over $1 million to go buy homes to take care of missionaries. And we also, when churches approach us and say, look, you buy the home, you keep the home, let us use it. And that way you profit. And we're not in. We're doing it for a strategic reason, and we don't really care who owns the home. We just don't want our missionaries to have to pay rent. And so, I'm thankful for you asking the question, because we could not be more pleased. That money, that is still an asset. Those 200, right at 200 homes we have, are assets that, as you know, IMB does the same thing internationally and had to sell some of those when they went through a challenging time. But we had that, whether CP's up or down, whether Annie's up or down, we have those assets there to bless our missionaries and to save them the rent. I can't tell you the look on the face of a couple when they move into the house, knowing they don't have a house payment for 2 years and they can save on the down payment. And what we actually do, Ben, is they pay a certain amount for utilities, and we track it. And if they paid more for utilities when they move out, then we write them a check and give the money back. The whole point was for them, to take care of them and to make up for some of the differences, because they don't make what they should. We'd love to pay them more. And if Annie could, we could get Annie up to 80, 90 million, we could do that.
Well, you just said something that I want to ask you to drill in a little bit on. You said the survivability rate, the 4-year survivability rate of North American Mission Board plants have shifted from a 50%, if I remember correctly. You said under 50 to now 80. Is that right?
Yeah, of course it's a floating number every year, but
no, I got you. But what's the secret to the sauce? How have you bent that curve?
No, that's a great question. It's roughly like 82 to 83% this year. The reason is the assessments. When I first started at NAMB, I went to different around the country, and on the non-South states, they would have their own assessments, and they were all at different levels. I had one particular conversation with a leader in a state, and I said, "What's your assessment?" And he said, "A pulse. If we can get somebody to move here, then we'll fund them." I said, "That's just ridiculous. We can't have a pulse that's a very low bar." So Send Network, we established Send Network. We established an assessment with Send Network where all of our planners are assessed at the same level. And what that did is, we end up, a lot of guys did not meet the bar. And so we need more planners, but we're saying no more. But the money's being used in a more strategic way. They're actually, the problem was, NAMB was sending people out to plant before 2010 that should not be. They were only setting them up to embarrass themselves before their mother-in-law. And what they should have done is raise the assessment. That's what we did. And we feel like we have the very best assessment out there. That's why, Southern Baptist will be very proud. Send Network is planting churches everywhere for everyone. If you're going to plant a church, I'm telling you, there's not a better way, in my opinion, than Send Network. And Vance Pittman's doing a fantastic job as the president of it. And I tell you, the next 10 years is what I cannot wait to see, because we were rebuilding the airplane in mid-flight. Now we've got it where we want it. We're going to still keep perfecting it, but it's going to take off. North Carolina just voted to be a Send Network state, and Arkansas voted to be a Send Network state. And so while we were only doing non-South, now we were doing 8 of the South states. And so the momentum's building at an incredible rate. Texas, at the SBTC, and Nathan Lorick, he just told me they're going to plant more churches this year, being a Send Network state, than they have in the last couple of decades. And so, um, we could not be more thrilled where we are. But the reason for the sustainability rate being high is we have raised the assessment and had to say no, considerably more, and find higher capacity guys. When I went through seminary, guys were like looking for a church. If you couldn't find a church and didn't want to be a missionary, well, you could always try to be a church planter.
So you can go
And
work at Lifeway. You go work at
yeah,
Lifeway.
again, I'm going to leave that alone. But
No, that was the joke when I was in seminary. Like, you
no,
can always get a job at Lifeway.
yeah, but but what we wanted to do is make it okay. Hey, look, if you're really high capacity, you can be a church planter, and then if not, then there's some other options out there. And I think we really have turned the narrative on that, and we want a national brotherhood of planners in this, and who know that, man, Southern Baptists have their back, and they do. I was so thrilled this past week. I got a letter from a planner and said, man, thank you so much for putting us on the prayer calendar. We've got literally hundreds of emails and letters from Southern Baptists. I never knew the family was so big. And, sometimes people want to get on social media and think of Southern Baptists or this and Southern Baptists or that. That is not the Southern Baptist Convention. That is not. And you can look at, there are 3 Southern Baptist conventions. They're the ones that meet in June to do business. There's a small amount of them on social media, but the real Southern Baptist Convention are the ones who are faithfully giving and praying for our missionaries, and they are loudly saying, we agree with the direction and we're on board. And that's why, I could not be more thankful to be a Southern Baptist than I am today. So you look around and you think, oh man, all the things flying around. We had 300 churches last year want to become Southern Baptist. There were already existing churches, affiliations they call. And so in the midst of all we go through, we still have hundreds of churches wanting to join the family. So yeah, we a perfect family? No, but we have a lot going well. We absolutely do. We have a lot to celebrate.
Well, I guess I'm 3 Southern Baptist. It sounds like I go in June. Uh, I raise a ruckus on social media, and I faithfully pray for and support Southern Baptist causes. So
No,
I almost feel like I've got multiple personality disorder going on here, having heard that. I didn't know I was 3 Southern Baptists. I thought I was just one.
yeah.
Um, so let me let me ask you about this issue. I want to drill back down on this issue of the SEN networks and the states that are becoming SEN networks. It sounded you mentioned Nathan Lark at SBTC and the good work that's being done there. Is NAMB going into states to do work through SEN network without the support, cooperation, and agreement of the state conventions that sort of have jurisdiction over church planting efforts there? How are you working with the state conventions? Is this something that's being done over, above, apart from, and bypassing state conventions, or is it in partnership with them?
No, well, originally in the non-South states, yes. Yeah, we wanted to raise the bar in church planting, and some didn't agree with it. And it's like, well, look, okay, NAM is spending millions of dollars funding this. We're not going to fund, say, state X out there if your standard for planters is going to be so low. We're just not going to do it. And so we established SEND Network so we could work with them or without them. And I'd prefer to do it with them, but I'm not going to do it with a low standard. And so now that was years and years ago. Now we have a great relationship with the non. I'm flying to Nevada on Sunday, going to a church plant on Sunday morning, and then meeting with the state exec on Monday to do a video because we're going to celebrate our partnership in Send Network Nevada. And then we have Send Network. Man, we could not be more thrilled with our partnership with Pete Ramirez in California, the new state exec there. So in the non-South, like I said, other than one state, we work really well. In the South, they typically would do their own thing. That was the agreement. I'll focus on the non-South where we need more churches. But now what we've seen is we really need to double back in the South or we're going to significantly lose ground. I mean, we cannot lose our emphasis and focus on the South. And so at the request of the South conventions, they have Florida was the very first one. Tommy Green said, hey, look, we'd love to partner. And be a Send Network state. And I said, man, that would be fantastic. Let's sit down and make that happen. We did. Oklahoma, Hans Dilbeck was the leader there, and he was the second one. And then now it's just grown, state by state by state. And we could not be more thrilled to partner. And we have in the South, we have great relationships with all those states. And if they're not a Send Network state, that's fine. We don't plant churches in the South with states that don't want us there doing it with them. And then it's not that they're bad. They just want to, hey, they've got a way and they like it and they want to do it that way. And that's fine. And we're adding states as we can afford it at this point. And so um, we're thankful for where we are, and we're working with all the states. We actually give a grant to every South state, whether they're a Send Network state or not. It's a $300,000 grant for church planning. So we do help support their church planning effort, even if they're not Send Network in the South. And so that's why I'm saying I've never been at NAMB where we've been in a better position in Send Network and Send Relief and in evangelism with the accurate, when you look at the accurate numbers, and we're incredibly thankful. Perfect? No. We got improvement areas? Absolutely. But, and I am thrilled about where we are.
Well, I want to talk to you for a second. I'm going to shift gears for a second, talk about Send Relief.